Thanks, Savannah. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to welcome everyone who's both in person and also online virtually with us to the Thursday Grand Rounds here from the Department of Pediatrics. I'm Brian Martin, Vice President of Medical Affairs here at UPMC Children's. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce both the topic and I think what are going to be two wonderful speakers on healthcare and the environment and our role in sustainability and reduction or hopefully even elimination of waste in what we do here in healthcare. Our two speakers today here will be Dr. Isabela Angelelli. Originally from Colombia, South America, she attended medical school at the Javeriana University School of Medicine. Dr. Angelelli completed her pediatric residency training here at UPMC Children's Hospital, Pittsburgh. She's experienced in emergency medicine and is currently the director of the CHP Pediatric Sedation Service. She's also a very visible, I might note, community and environmental health advocate. She is the Children's Hospital Pittsburgh Environmental Quality Team Champion and serves in the UPMC Environmental Initiatives Committee. The current focus of her work in the environmental world includes trees as a public health intervention and efforts to decrease the carbon footprint of our healthcare system. She is a board member at Tree Pittsburgh, and she brought the One Tree Per Child program to our city. More than 3,000 children in our region have planted more than 3,000 trees through this initiative. Dr. Angelelli is also the co-founder and co-chairperson, of Clinicians for Climate Action, a group of UPMC clinicians supporting our healthcare system in decarbonizing its operations and implementing a more sustainable practice. Co-presenting today will be Dr. Noe Woods. Dr. Noe Woods is the Assistant Dean for Healthcare Sustainability and also Assistant Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. She is also a director of Clinicians for Climate Action, our 500-member plus strong UPMC-based clinicians group. She is the course director for Planetary Health and elective at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School and a member of the Environmental Initiatives Steering Committee for UPMC. Her pioneering research involves environmental life cycle analysis of medical procedures, including surgery and the birth of a baby, with a goal of reducing the environmental impact of healthcare practices. She has completed a fellowship in climate health through Cambridge Health Alliance and Harvard School of Public Health, and is a frequent speaker on the environmental impact of medicine. Dr. Woods has been an invited speaker at numerous events, including a keynote speaker at CleanMed, Maryland Hospitals for a Healthy Environment, Kaiser Permanente Green Summit, AORN, Tufts University, Cooper Medical School, and Allegheny Health Network. We welcome Dr. Woods and Dr. Angelelli for their presentations this morning.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that very comprehensive introduction. Good morning. Is the sound okay? Okay, perfect. And I'm going to make sure I can advance and unadvanced. Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. My disclosure is that I owe a lot to this hospital for taking care of my kids every time they break something, tear something, etc. So thank you for all of the things you've done for my sporty children. So in the next hour, we're going to talk to you about healthcare sustainability, one of my favorite topics. And before I became a doctor, I wanted to be an astronaut and took a wrong turn at some point and became an OBGYN. But when I was little, I spent a lot of time dreaming about space travel, possibly the least environmentally sustainable job on Earth. But there's an effect called the overview effect that astronauts have. So when astronauts go outside the space shuttle, they have a maneuver called the windshield wiper maneuver. Their feet are tethered to a fixed arm, and then they're swept across the sky. I don't know what the purpose is. They're doing something to the space shuttle, but at some point they're tethered by their feet, sort of floating outside of the space shuttle, looking at the Earth. And as you can imagine, a lot goes through the person's mind when that's happening to them. And several astronauts have described something called the overview effect, which has two components. So as they're floating above their planet, they realize sort of viscerally all at once two things. One, when they look at the Earth, they see the absolute interconnectedness of it. One astronaut said, when I looked at the planet, I was like, poverty, no problem. Like, we got this. We're all on a bubble together. It just seems so possible. And so the interconnectedness becomes sort of physically, viscerally visible. And then the second thing they realize is the absolute inhospitality of space, and sort of the miracle of we're on this tiny little bubble, almost like you were blowing a bubble, hovering on the surface of this thing that is such an outlier when you look at the vastness of space. So you develop this incredible gratitude for what the planet offers us and how different it is than the rest of space. That's the overview effect. I always wanted that as a kid. And healthcare sustainability, less glamorous, but during this talk, I want to try to give you a frame shift that brings to light those two things as they relate to your job in healthcare and as a human on this planet, as a Homo sapien. Now, I got started with this, so you go through your whole training, and the first time, if you remember, if you're a physician, the first time you get to do what you actually want is your grand rounds, your senior year, your chief year. So my and those are always really cool, sort of off topics, because it's something of personal interest. So it was 2005, which, you know, everything after 2000 to me is one big general category. The 80s and 90s had distinct personalities, but everything from 2000 on, but that's actually a long time ago. But that's when I got a chance to follow the trash. So one thing I had spent 4 years generating enormous amounts of trash, feeling really guilty about it as sort of a nature inclined person. And so for my grand rounds, I just followed each of the trash streams. I didn't really understand what a landfill was, right? Because I was a gynecologist. I had no reason to understand that, but I followed all of our trash streams. That got me started in a journey of taking this interest of mine into sort of a more scientific direction. So I'm gonna give you a couple of very sobering statistics as a frame shift, as an overview effect. Dr. Angelelli and I never need to talk about the importance of global warming anymore. Mother Nature has been a much better teacher than we could be. You know, it seems at times as though everything north of us and west of us is on fire. And we know that we used to get on average $1 billion extreme weather event every 4 months. That was our historic average. And now every 3 weeks. So we don't have to talk about that. Everybody understands that. But there's a couple of things I've learned about the planet that I want to share with you. So one thing is that if you take humans and all of the livestock that we eat, we are 96% of the mammalian biomass. So what percentage are wild animals? 4%. Bears, elephants, tigers, lions, raccoons, all of those things, not birds because they're not mammals, all of those things are 4%. So we Homo sapiens have the capacity to really change the surface of this planet. We also have the capacity to unengineer the things that we've done, right? We have a great deal of power. If you look at our forests, a third of our forests are gone. 96% of our old growth forests in the United States is gone. And they'll do population surveys of animals. And we know that there is a 68% decline in the number of animals since the 1970s. So, and if you look at like freshwater fish, if you're somebody who likes to fish, you know how hard it is now to get fish. It's more in the 80s, the high 80s. So depending on what population. So we have drastically changed this planet, which though has the capacity to regrow, and we have the capacity to re-engineer the things that have caused these kind of changes. So as you already know this, so this is the statistic that really makes me quite sad. I think as pediatricians, this isn't actually probably very surprising to you. To most audiences, this is pretty surprising, but 88%, so close to 90% of the disease burden from climate change is people under age 5. That's mostly happening through malnutrition. So floods and droughts really affect food quality. When you have higher CO2 levels, your crops grow differently. They have less protein content, and lots of other changes like that. That's mostly why that's the case. So when my kids are old, when they're super old, at the turn of the century, if they live that long, the number of temperature degrees is going to be somewhere between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius. So for us United Statesians, you have to kind of almost double that. But one of the things that's hard to predict is sea level changes. It's a little bit longer term. Many of the predictions that we've had have been really very spot on. We've exceeded many of the predictions, but when you look at the coastlines, I think is really helpful because 13 of our 20 largest cities are on the coast in the world. And if you look at this, these orange lines are where we're going to be underwater. This includes, just so you know, during my children's lifetime, Wall Street, Harlem, the entire Everglades, Daytona Beach, lots of places won't be over, they'll be underwater if my kids live into their 90s. So that's the depressing part. So our healthcare system, we as a system contribute 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the United States. We are very, very energy intensive. If you take all of healthcare and you make it a country, so this is globally, we're the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter, the things that we do taking care of our patients. If you take just the US, it's the 13th, which is, we're only 4% of the population on the globe, 4.2%. So it's pretty stunning. If you look at the harm, you can actually calculate the harm we do through our electricity generation, through the waste we produce, all the things we do. If you look at just the harm we cause from our electricity production, that is comparable to medical errors in terms of the damage to patients. So you can calculate how many cases of asthma, for example, you cause running your ICU ventilators, et cetera. Of course, you're doing a lot more good, right, for your patient's lungs running their ventilators, but there is an environmental impact of that. And that impact is equivalent to medical errors. If you think about what we have done to prevent medical errors and how very common they are, and the response that we've had to our environmental impact, you can see a big disparity in the levels of response, right? Our response is not commensurate with the harm that we cause because we're unaware of it. It's actually quite invisible. I didn't really understand it until I started taking field trips looking at trash, which I'll take you on, took some pictures. Per capita, the US is winning in this category. So the top line there, this is per capita per patient, what our carbon footprint is. So here in the United States, we expend a lot more carbon per patient. You can see there, we make 57 times, for instance, the amount of carbon per patient than in India, which will come up a little bit later. So we are winning that race. So this is one of my favorite studies. This is what's called a life cycle analysis. So this is where you start from the raw materials, you look through the phase of building them, transporting them, using them, and then disposing of them. That's called life cycle analysis. That's what I researched. This particular study looked at cataracts in India, and they calculated the entire environmental footprint in India versus the UK for cataract surgery. The most important thing about this study is that the surgeons in India had the same surgical outcomes, and they had the same infectious complications and the same procedural outcomes. And they had a much, much more significant expenditure of energy in the UK. Why? You're getting the exact same outcome. Why is it so much more efficient to perform a cataract surgery in India? Well, if you look at the categories, there are things like medical equipment, building energy use, your pharmaceuticals, things that we just put our hand out and say, please hand me this or that instrument, right? We don't think about where it comes from. So I asked the researcher who did this study, like, what are they doing in India? And she said, they were so efficient. You go in, she said, everything was streamlined. They have very high volume procedurals, and they reuse everything. They rewash and reuse everything, and it just goes back in a circle. And they just have it down, basically. That's the difference there. So there are a lot of people who are concerned about this. And recently, there was a publication, 200 medical journals, New England Journal, all the big ones, published this all at the same time. And basically, it was very well written and didn't sugarcoat what we need to do. And I just want to draw your attention to a few conclusions that these authors made. So, it's code red, it's a big deal. We need to rapidly reduce emissions, et cetera, et cetera. But the key thing, global targets aren't enough. The key thing they said is huge investment is needed beyond what's being considered or delivered anywhere. And then the key thing is this will mean changing clinical practice. So we'll talk a little bit and think a little bit during this hour about what that means. But it's profoundly different. Medicine would look profoundly different if it were environmentally sustainable. So I'll take you on a little history trip here. So this is a surgery before the germ theory of disease. And you can see how dapper the surgeons are. Frankly, I'm sort of envious of that part of things, but I wouldn't want to be the patient, certainly, an 18th century surgeon. Back then, they used to say what made a good surgeon was the eye of an eagle, the hands of a woman, and the heart of a lion. Because you had to cut fast, obviously. This patient would have had ether anesthetic as well. You can see it being sprayed from the bedside over there. And then if you fast forward 100 years, this is, you can see down in the bottom left, that's Harvey. He's a neurosurgeon. He pioneered neurosurgery. You can see why operating rooms were called operating theaters back then. And you can see that the germ theory of disease has now been discovered and they've covered their mouths. But everything in this operating room is going to be reused. Fast forward another 70 years. This is Michael DeBakey. If those of you who are ever in an operating room, I don't know if you use DeBakey's. They're really big forceps and your patients are so little. I see some nodding. I love DeBakey. In obstetric, in OBGYN, we use big forceps. But DeBakey was a cardiac surgeon. He pioneered bypass surgery. And I just want you to look at this OR he's in. So in this picture, actually, you can't see it, but behind his assistant there, all of his instruments are stainless steel. Everything he's using for these bypasses is going to be sterilized on site and reused for his next case. All of their gowns are cloth. The drapes are cloth. And even the anesthetic is going through a glass bottle. The only thing disposable you see in this picture is their masks, which may or may not be disposable. I can't tell. But nothing else do you see that is going to be thrown away. You all know this. This is the Da Vinci. I don't know if you have a Da Vinci at Children's, but essentially this is the robot. And essentially nothing in this picture is going to be, everything is going to be disposed of other than the patient and the surgeons, right? But everything that's touching everything, all the instruments you see on the table there, how did this happen, right? Well, so the surgical supply companies make money every time we throw away an instrument. They make better instruments. I'm not going to use an inferior instrument when I do laparoscopy on my patient. I'm going to use whatever sharpest, best, seals the best, et cetera. That happens to be extremely expensive and disposable. But we designed it that way, right? So the robotic arms there get thrown away after 5 to 8 uses, depending on what instrument you're using. They're designed to do that, right? An engineer could have designed it to be sterilized on site and reused. So it turns out through my journeys through sustainability, I've learned this is actually a kind of a big deal. If you look at what is the future of the OR, if you Google it, it's ever escalating technology. And I'm here to say, I'm not sure that that is the future of the OR. So if you look at an OR, which is my particular interest, it's extremely energy intensive. We turn over air 20 times an hour. It has to be a certain amount of fresh air. It requires a great deal of energy. And it also generates a huge amount of trash. This is a study looking at an ER department in Boston, and they collected their trash for 24 hours, and then they did a bunch of math. And it turns out that the amount of trash an emergency department makes is equivalent to driving 200 passenger cars for an entire year. So, and then when they looked at the trash, it was totally, there was HIPAA stuff in the regular trash. Everything was poorly set. There was food. I mean, you name it. It was, you know how that is when you're working in an ER, where you put your trash is the least of your concerns. So I took a bunch of engineers at Pitt. We have really quite a trove of these really great engineers. I took them into the operating rooms. That's the robot behind us. And I wanted to ask the question, okay, I'm totally overwhelmed. This is like very overwhelming and depressing. What are some things that are really effective? Like, I only have a limited amount of time. I'm a physician. What are things that are going to be extremely effective? And I wanted to answer that question using life cycle analysis. Because the things we see, the trash, for instance, maybe they're not as important as, say, the HVAC system, which is literally invisible to me. So I got these engineers into the operating room. We did all kinds of things where, like on the left, we took chicken and they're frying it with a ligasure, measuring the amount of electricity when you push the pedal, when you don't. It was like, and the next picture is, that's a PhD student who went on to do his PhD. He's an engineer in understanding healthcare impacts. And those are 2 endotracheal stylets that he made into a little heart, because what we're doing in these pictures is we're sorting through the trash of lots and lots of hysterectomies to figure out what is in this trash, what is it made of. And then these engineers went back and computed the environmental impact of everything throughout the hysterectomy. And basically what we found is that this is just comparing the 4 different modes. So you can take a uterus out of a woman vaginally, abdominally, laparoscopically, or robotically. So I chose that surgery as my test case because I thought it would be interesting to see how our different modes have what their environmental impact is here. And And on the left, abdominal and vaginal hysterectomy, no shocker, have a way lower environmental impact than laparoscopy and robotic surgery, which of course have smaller incisions. But as you're not OBGYNs, but a vaginal hysterectomy, I believe, is the best. But it does also, it has similar patient outcomes in terms of recovery and everything. Abdominal, obviously, we'd only do that if the uterus is really large or cancer or something. This case didn't look at this was all for benign cases, this study. But anyway, if you look at why, which is what I was really interested in, what are the components? And sorry for how busy this slide is, but I'll just sort of verbally tell you what the important things were. So there's a purple box you see on all 4 modes of hysterectomy. That's your anesthetic gases. That turns out to have a pretty sizable impact. Didn't know that. Okay. Then the other big box you see there is the light green. That's huge. What is going on with the laparoscopy and the robotics? That's the stuff we throw away. Those are all our toys. So turns out that, the lighting, for instance, and other things, barely show up relative to every time I throw away a ligature. That has a really significant environmental impact. So those 2 areas really stand out when you look at that. Sorry for how ugly this slide is. You don't try to read it. Just let yourself float here for a second. So what we did is we took the environmental impact of a hysterectomy and we just took all the interventions that we currently have, removing, using renewable energy, maximizing recycling, using as few instruments as possible, et cetera. Just the things that were immediately available. How much can we reduce the impact theoretically? And it's 80%. So on the left, the left column is the real life, what a hysterectomy, causes. And then on the right, that little column is the theoretical, if we did all of those things. How much could we reduce it? So really quite a huge intervention just from technology already available. And the big winners there are, I went to our MIS surgeons and I said, what are the fewest instruments you need to really do this? And that made, as you saw from how big what impact those instruments have, that makes a big impact. We switched to renewable energy. We did all sorts of things and you can see it takes the notch out. Each time you do one of these things, it just takes a notch out. Guess what? If you maximize recycling, everybody's sorting everything perfectly. You're due to where do you see that? See that second column? There's a tiny little purpley thing down there. That's the difference you make if you educate the whole OR staff, you get all these programs going. It's a lot of energy for a very small impact. So after I did this study, I stopped giving any of my time to recycling initiatives. And I focused much more on the HVAC system and why aren't we using renewable energy and how can we pressure the surgical supply companies to give us reusable instruments, et cetera. Okay, I have 3 minutes. We're gonna go really fast through the trash. This is one baby's birth. Because you're in healthcare, this birth went well, right? Nothing bad happened. Nobody hemorrhaged. This is a nice, normal, spontaneous vaginal delivery in a normal amount of time. If something had gone wrong, there'd be a lot more trash. So the waste streams you guys are all familiar with, there's regulated medical waste, the red stuff. In the silver bin is the placenta. I think you guys can handle that, being in medicine. There's the regular, what we call municipal trash and the clear plastic bags. And the light green is the whatever color you'd call that. That's linens, okay? So those are our trash streams. So our regular waste goes to the Monroeville landfill. This is a picture of our Monroeville landfill. Landfills, by the way, are designed to not let things decompose. They're designed to be like clay pots where it just sits in there forever. So at our landfill, they cover it over with sludge from the steel mill to kind of seal it in. This is where our regulated medical waste goes. So when you put things into those red containers, that is supposed to be waste capable of producing an infectious disease. That's how it's defined. There are big battles about what that means. It's very much more expensive. So it's 30 cents per pound versus about 2 to 3 cents per pound. So we have an interest in putting things like your Dorito wrappers in there, because here's what happens to it. It goes to this machine right here where it gets sprayed with that substance and it gets brought up to 250 degrees for about 4 hours. Then it gets put on another truck and it gets driven to that landfill that you saw. It takes a lot more energy. So you only want to do that if it's really something capable of producing an infectious disease. Turns out when you look at people getting infections from trash, the main risk is splash risk to the eye from liquids in the OR. which you need to be very careful with. Getting an infectious disease from some solid waste, for example, if you have a patient with HIV menstruating at home, she's putting that in the regular trash, right? That's not getting through this process. And that's because people don't, I don't know of any cases of people getting infections from that kind of waste. But that's what we do with our regulated medical waste. What about the placenta? At McGee, we make 7 tons of, the patients make 7 tons of placentas per year. And so that any body part has to be incinerated by federal law. That's trucked on a refrigerated truck down to North Carolina. This is our incinerator that we use. That is the group POO, Prisoners of Our Homes, protesting our incinerated waste. That's by federal law. We also, by the way, incinerate all of our chemo, any plastic, anything from chemo. So the PVC plastic gets incinerated. When you heat things up, it makes other chemicals. We make dioxin, which is a very potent carcinogen, when we dispose of our chemo waste. Obviously, quite ironic. Okay, how many minutes do I have before I send you up here? None. Okay, we're going to go really fast. And she's going to talk about anesthetics. This is what the whole carbon footprint of a healthcare system looks like, and the different hotspots. The National Health Services in England is really ahead of us. They are decarbonizing, and I'll just show you this graph, which some people hate. I like this graph. This shows you how you make a carbon neutral healthcare system. So as you go to the right, what they've done is they've reduced their carbon footprint immensely in the UK. And these are all the different categories and the ways they do it. You can look at this later if it's really fascinating to you. But the key thing that I want to point out is that decarbonization, so they reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by 62%. A great deal of that was done through national decarbonization of the electric grid. But their absolute reduction was only 26% because patients got sicker. They were delivering more healthcare. And their conclusion from that is that you have to decrease the amount and the intensity of healthcare. You can't have a sustainable healthcare system if people are sedentary, eating high fructose corn syrup, and all have diabetes and hypertension. You have to actually address primary prevention, which you guys do every day. But that is a huge part of actually making your healthcare system something that can go on into the future. So investing in prevention is really important. We're going to skip that. And so ultimately, good practice is not going to depend on a shop of tools. It's going to depend on the skills of the practitioner. And this is DeBakey operating at age 90. Presumably the person across from the table is a fully competent attending physician, I presume. But certainly we can all sort of appreciate what he said. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Angelelli. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Noe. So during the second half, I'm going to share with you the opportunities and the possibilities that we have to bring healthcare sustainability to the bedside. You will see how healthcare sustainability is not just about decreasing waste and decreasing our carbon footprint. It is also about decreased costs. It is about increased employee engagement. It is about teamwork, having interdisciplinary conversations, and it is also about opportunities to bring improved patient care. You will also see how we as clinicians are in the best position to identify interventions and to help implement and embrace the sustainability initiatives that we will see coming down the road. How did my journey begin? About 6 or 7 years ago, I found myself reading a book about a place in Colombia where they have planted more than 20 million trees in a deserted area and transformed that into a biodiverse forest. While I was reading this book, I was so moved. I decided that I had to go to that place. And I went there. And when I was there, there was this deep sense of connection with nature and a sense of mission. And I said, I'm going to come back to Pittsburgh and I'm going to plant trees. I was then given the opportunity to start the One Tree Per Child program. And thanks to Tree Pittsburgh, we have a fully well-run official program. We have planted more than 3,000 trees with more than 3,000 kids in the Pittsburgh schools. So it has been an amazing journey. And initially I said, well, I didn't really see the connection. And so, well, maybe I'm just a pediatrician that plants trees. And little by little, I started to discover this powerful connection between nature, trees, environment, and health. And I began to be connected with people within the UPMC healthcare system that cared about this, and we're doing things in the same line of action, but from different perspectives. That's how I met Noe, and that's how I met an amazing group of doctors that cared about this and were working on this. And we decided to get together and create a group called Clinicians for Climate Action. We decided that our first step was going to be to write a petition and send it to the system. So on April 2022, we released this petition, and we had very clear asks for our system. You can see them there. Sign the White House climate pledge, develop a climate plan, go to renewable electricity, etc. Within 12 hours, Leslie Davis responded, and the response was, yes, we care about this. This is important work. And she immediately began to connect us with people within the system that were already doing work in this area. And the next thing that happened is our chief medical and administrative sustainability officers were named, Mike Boninger and John Krolicki. John Krolicki is the vice president of facilities for Children's Hospital as well, and he has done a lot of work in the past years for sustainable buildings. And Mike Boninger is a rehab medicine doctor. He's been at UPMC for more than 30 years. It is a pleasure to work with him. He's also an engineer, and he's fully committed to taking our system in a sustainability journey. In October of 2022, UPMC signed the White House Healthcare Sector Climate Pledge. That means we made a public commitment to decarbonize our operations, a huge step. In December of 2022, it's going to be a one-year anniversary. UPMC opened the doors of the UPMC Center for Sustainability. Clinicians for Climate Action has an office there. There's a physical space. It's fully staffed. We have 5 people working there every day, doing calculations and figuring the way in which we're going to do this. They released a climate plan already. It's going to be released publicly in January. They reached to all of the hospital presidents, and now we have 15 hospitals within UPMC that have environmental champions and environmental teams. The UPMC Center for Sustainability has a steering committee. Clinicians for Climate Action has representation there. And the way in which they're working is just pretty amazing to see what's happening. They have created working groups within all of the service lines that we have at UPMC. And to those working groups, the executive leadership from those lines go there. So we have surgical services, food services, EVA, supply chain, etc. Another line that we're starting to work on is creating sustainable models of care. And as the result of the surgical line working group efforts, in September of 2023, that was just a couple of months ago, UPMC announced that desflurane is going to be banned from the formulary. As Noe mentioned, anesthetic gases are greenhouse gases. That was a huge surprise for me. And desflurane in particular, it is extremely potent at causing global warming. It's 2,500 times more potent than CO2. Going through a 200 milliliter bottle of desflurane is the equivalent of burning 970 pounds of coal. So this was a very impactful decision, and we're very excited. We could not be more proud of our health system for this response. We're really infusing and bringing sustainability everywhere and making it the context in which we have conversations. Last month, Dr. Noe Woods was announced as the assistant dean of the Office for Sustainability Medicine, which was created. Climate medicine is now part of the curriculum, and Clinicians for Climate Action has more than 550 members. When we wrote that letter, we framed it in a very positive way. We told the system, we want to see these things happening to get to net zero, but we also want to be part of this work. And we started to think, how are we going to contribute to this from the bedside? We decided to pick a couple of things that really bothered us. And personally, I was really, really struggling with putting blood pressure cuffs and pulse oximeters in the trash every day, 3 per patient that I sedate in the sedation radiology unit. So I said, let's start small. We're busy. People don't have time for extra projects. We're overwhelmed already. Let's make it small. Let's make it simple. Let's make it a QI project so we can have very clear outcomes and very clear ways of measuring what we're doing. And if we're successful, let's expand. So we formed a team. Ray Colvin from supply chain, Diane Cancilla, unit director of radiology at that time, Juliana Wattenpool, a CRNA. And we said, how many pulse ox probes does UPMC go through in a year? CHP, 180,000. That's $1 million. We have the Stryker sustainability collection boxes where we can reuse them and reprocess them. We only collect 20% of what we could. So that $1 million is going to the trash. In the radiology unit, it's about $7,500 per year. That's more than $38,000. So we said, let's start there. We decided to reach out to the Wolf Center, and with the support of our amazing coaches, we joined the Advanced Quality Education Series, and we decided to go from single-use to reusable pulse ox probes, did a lot of education, a lot of planning, and we went live February 1st. And this is what happened. That's our baseline use, about 636 probes per month. February 1st, dramatic decrease in use, sustained decrease in use as well. It's about a 62% decrease overall. We're getting better and better. Look at October. I did November yesterday, and I was so excited to see that this project is already on autopilot. I no longer have to hunt people and tell them to please use the other one. But I was very intrigued about these green bars, because when I wrote the QI project, I said, I think this is going to be 95% decrease in use. I mean, how could we just not get rid of them altogether? Well, what you see there is human behavior. We all have our perceptions. We do things the way we like. We get used to doing things a certain way, and change is difficult. But the other big part of this is human factors design. This is the perfect example of how the industry has dedicated much more resources to designing very good disposable single-use tools. Every time we throw one away, we buy another one. And the reusable probe is not as easy to use as a single-use one. So we need to pressure the industry. We need to change the way things are being done. We joined engineers from the University of Pittsburgh Mascaro Center for Sustainable Innovation, Natalia Cano and Melissa Bilek, joined efforts with us, and they did a life cycle analysis comparing the single-use pulse oximeter with the reprocessed one from Stryker with the reusable one that we're using. The different colors in the bars represent every step in the process or in the life of those items. And you can see how the single-use and the reprocessed are 26 times and 8 times more carbon intensive than the reusable one. So we're having real impact here. And when they looked at the different categories of environmental impact, you can see that the single-use probe accounts for most of the negative environmental impact compared to the reusable one, which is what you see in yellow. And this is how we have decreased our carbon emissions per month. Total, we have decreased about 435 kilograms of CO2. Initially, I didn't know what that meant. Now I'm getting more used to these numbers, but that's the equivalent of driving a car for 1,100 miles or charging 55,800 cell phones, quite a bit. The radiology staff, the nurses, the PCTs, the leadership, the APPs, the doctors, everyone has been part of this. This is really their work. These are their results. So it's just been very exciting to see how these initiatives are embraced. We went live in the operating room 2 weeks ago, so I don't have results yet. If we do a 50% reduction, look at the impact. Look at the cost savings. Who's going to say no to this, right? One of the most exciting parts of this work has been connecting with people. Look at the amount of people that are involved in making this project happen. We have to talk to everyone, from unit directors, chief of departments, the people that clean our operating rooms, infection prevention, students, residents, everyone. So for me, this is also a way of creating community, of creating opportunity for interdisciplinary conversations. And when you have that, there is room for creativity, innovation, ingenuity, new ideas. So we decided to go live with blood pressure cuffs in the radiology unit tomorrow. We go through more than 10,000 of these single-use blood pressure cuffs. Interesting, some people in many areas of the hospital are starting to reuse the single-use blood pressure cuffs. So we're completely out of compliance. We shouldn't be reusing any of this. So let's just move to reusable, right? Look at the impact. We are going to save $67,000 per year just one unit, one device. We're going to divert almost 500 kilograms of waste from the landfill. And based on previous LCA analysis, we know that we're going to prevent about 3 tons of CO2 from being released into the atmosphere. That's the equivalent of driving from Pittsburgh to Los Angeles 3 times. Big impact there. And this has minimal impact on the staff. We need to pay a lot of attention to how we're going to clean these devices. When we ask people what they perceive as barriers for these projects, they want to make sure that we are cleaning all of these devices properly. So we have a strategy for cleaning them. We have a visual cue. People are going to put the clean blood pressure cuffs and pulse ox probes in this basket. If they're not there, they know they're not clean. But these people are already cleaning the rooms. So it's just cleaning the blood pressure cuff and the pulse ox. So there's really no added burden. And the Center for Sustainability became interested in this project. So we're looking now at expanding the reusable blood pressure cuffs system-wide. Look at the impact. UPMC goes through about 1.8 million blood pressure cuffs per year. That's $2.5 to $3 million. Can you imagine what we can do with that money? Look at the impact. It's going to be the equivalent, the emissions from those blood pressure cuffs are the equivalent of running 126 houses per year. And look at the amount of waste that is no longer going to go to the landfill. In MRI, and you'll see a lot of these projects are just things that are in our everyday lives. And I hope that when you go out back to the wards after this presentation, you start thinking and identifying the opportunities and connect with us and tell us, because this is why we at the bedside are best positioned to identify the interventions. So we use a lot of linens in MRI. We go through about 18 tons of linens per year, 3 tons of CO2 are associated with that. And we saw that people were using washcloths and blankets to position the patients in MRI. So we said, why don't we go to foam positioners? They're reusable, they can be cleaned. And only running this pilot project in one MRI room, we're decreasing the use of linens that are being laundered by 1.5 tons per year, a 43.5 cost reduction, because obviously there's an expense to do that, and a very significant reduction in CO2 emissions, 252 kilograms of CO2. That's the equivalent of driving a car for more than 600 miles or charging more than 30,000 cell phones. People were leaving their flow meters on. For some reason, it's so difficult to remember to turn them off. And we did an audit. Per year, we end up wasting in that area of the hospital 1,500,000 liters of oxygen. So we did education. Now everyone is turning them off. And it's been so exciting to see this culture of sustainability being born and infusing our area. They're even doing it when I'm not there. I'm not there, and they're setting the room with the cushions. They're turning the oxygen off. And it's just very exciting to see that happen. When I presented this work to the emergency room, the first thing that they said was, when are we going to get rid of the yellow stethoscopes? You know those, right? Fisher Price stethoscopes are better than those. And people actually put them in their pockets because they forget the stethoscope at home, or they don't bring their own. And they go from room to room, reusing this single-use item and not even cleaning it in between patients. We had a meeting with the emergency room this morning with the nurses, and the reception was just amazing. Everyone was like, yeah, why not, right? The emergency room went through 20,000 of this in 2021 and 2022. Can you imagine that? That is about $30,000 to $36,000 in savings that we can generate if we stop using those. We will also provide better patient care, right? Our patients will get much better auscultations. That's a lot of waste that's gonna not go to the landfill. 5,783 kilograms of CO2 will be prevented. Most exciting, the engineers at the University of Pittsburgh are almost done with the life cycle analysis of the yellow stethoscopes. And so we know that this number that I'm sharing with you, it's our own number, and we have scientific data to prove that we're actually being impactful. Leanne is here. It's just here. We love this project. Since we learned about this project, we're like, oh my God. So keep your eyes and ears open, because we want takers and champions for this project. She works a lot of night shifts, and she saw that EVS, the people that clean the rooms, they have to remove the trash bags, whether there is just a little piece of paper or if it's full, they have to take those bags. 51 trash cans on her floor, okay? 13,000 bags per year, $600, 350 pounds of bags that go to the landfill and don't really decompose. 400 kilograms of CO2. She asked people to give up their can, kick the can. And she put a big central trash can where people can bring their trash from the day. And it's been going on for more than a year, and it's been a success. And this is so easy, and look at the impact. So please, we need takers, we need champions to replicate this project. We have all the materials, everything, we'll give it to you. I'm hoping many of you will email us. One of the MRI techs was admitted to the hospital at Presby. And when she came back, she said, you need to do something about this. Every time I asked for water, they gave me a new plastic water pitcher with a foam liner. And I told them that I wanted to put the water in the same one that I already had. And they said, no, you have to get a new one. She went through 6 or 7 of these per day. So I came back to Children's and I said, let's see what's going on here. Well, we got through 120,000 of the foam liners and 110,000 of the pitchers per year. We only have 17,000 admissions. So on average, every patient is going through 6 or 7 of this. Is there a need for that? $51,000 per year. Lots of waste. Large carbon footprint. Look at the emissions there. That's the equivalent of running 5.4 average size cars for a year or 3 homes. Potential solution, if we go to stainless steel, if we buy 1,000 pitchers, that would be $8,000. We'll get, after that, we'll get to save $51,000. Obviously, we have to figure out the logistics, right? Who's gonna clean them? Who's gonna deliver them? We figured it out. Thank you to our food services director who is here and has been eager to help us with all of these projects. So we're waiting for a good moment to run a small pilot project and see what happens from there. Decreasing food waste. So you can see we're working everywhere. The opportunities are everywhere. Thank you for our food services. Stephanie Harrod, Matt Reverso from the Koala Cafe. We had one meeting, one conversation. Leanne was part of this. Emily Gentle, one of our residents, has also been a champion for these projects. One meeting with 412 Food Rescue. November 2nd, we went live. 400 pounds of food was recovered during the first week and donated. The formula that we have on our shelves has to be removed 1 month before expiration. It's no longer going to waste. It's going to a daycare where kids and families are using it. And we also have developed sustainable pathways of care. ABRs, auditory brainstem response testing, was being done in the operating room. Patients intubated on anesthetic gases for an hour. Now we give them intranasal prosthetics. It acts inducing a state very similar to sleep. This is a non-stimulating procedure. Kids sleep for an hour. We do the test. They go home. There's no intubation. There's no plastic. There's nothing else there. Cost savings, look at that, 36% reduction. Big opportunity for all of us. Look at what happens with MRIs. An MRI, running an MRI machine is the equivalent of running 12 houses or 15 to 20 refrigerators at the same time. CT, about 3 houses. Can we think differently? There are ways to put the MRI machines on standby mode and save about 33% in electricity. We also know that 30% of the imaging tests that we order are unnecessary. So the next time that we choose an imaging modality, or we're going to do a test on our patients, can we add that to the decision-making equation? Can we move from a more energy to a less energy-intensive modality? If you don't know if you want a CT or an MRI, they seem to be the same for this patient. Well, maybe if I think about the environmental impact, I will have another factor that will help me make my decision. So finally, how can we bring sustainability to all of our conversations? Sustainability needs to be the context in which we have conversations in healthcare. The same way in which we are considering social impact and financial impact when we think about the outcomes for our patients, we need to infuse environmental sustainability in the way we think. I want to thank you for listening. Please visit and join the Viva Engage page for the UPMC Center for Sustainability. You can go to, it's through SharePoint. That's the QR code if you want to use it. It's a great way of staying connected and also posting there your ideas, your thoughts, and everything you want us to hear about. You can also join our email list. It's a great way of keeping updated on all of this work and then on the opportunities that you will have to contribute. And we also need your support, spreading and implementing the initiatives that are going to come from the system. So this is a great way of staying involved. We also have a website. It's Pitt-based, c4ca.pitt.edu. You can also email me. If you Google, if you go to the email and you type in Angelelli, you'll find me. So very easy. I'm giving you tons of ways in which you can reach out to us. And I just wanted to leave you with some resources if you're more interested. These are amazing. If you Google Ezra Klein decarbonization, it's an amazing 1-hour podcast where it will take you to the next level in your knowledge of sustainability. And these books and podcasts are also very, very informative. We highly recommend it. Thank you very much. And we will take questions. Noe, do you want to talk?